Hello, I'm Stephen Fagan, curator of the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. Our institution's ongoing oral history project explores the history and culture of the 1960s, as well as the life, death, and legacy of President John F. Kennedy. This year, to celebrate Martin Luther King Day and Black History Month, we are pleased to present Voices from the Civil Rights Movement, a special series of recent oral history interviews with 1960s activists. In these intimate, detailed, one-on-one conversations, an outstanding group of storytellers share powerful memories from several key moments of the movement, including the Montgomery bus boycott, freedom rides, the March on Washington, Mississippi Freedom Summer, the Selma to Montgomery March, and the SCOPE project of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. We hope that these remarkable, relevant stories will spark conversation and build bridges of understanding and communication between generations. Please keep in mind that these are full, free-flowing oral history interviews. In addition to moments of technical difficulties, there may be harsh language and graphic descriptions of violence. Viewer discretion is advised. If you or someone you know would like to share memories of the 1960s or articulate how President Kennedy has impacted your life, please contact us at oralhistory@jfk.org. We continue to record conversations year-round as part of this ongoing archival initiative, and we believe that everyone has a story. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy these voices from the civil rights movement. And the interview we're doing today is part of our museum's ongoing oral history project. And today it's a great honor to be here with Thomas Armstrong. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story for this collection.
Thank you, Stephen, for inviting me here. Really appreciate being here. And yes, I guess I should start by saying that I was born in 1941. in Jefferson Davis County, Mississippi, a small rural town in a community, all Black community known as Lucas. And that community was created by free slaves in order that they would have less contact as possible with Caucasian in the area. That was the reason for the startup of that particular Black community there. My dad was a lawyer. My mom was a housewife. Dad owned 3 or 4 old log trucks and things, and he hired individuals from the community to work with him. Evidently, he paid them fairly decent wages. I don't know exactly what those were, but everybody was eager to be employed by him. So we had a fairly decent life, financial life in a segregated state, as much as possible for Blacks at that particular time. So I really didn't necessarily want for anything growing up there. My first encounter with segregation was at Dairy King ice cream establishment in a small town nearby, in Prentice, Mississippi, where my high school was located. I loved the blues, and I listened to the blues too late one night and missed my bus to school, which was 5 miles away. And so I caught a ride into the little town of Prentice, and the gentleman dropped me off in front of an ice cream parlor. So I walked up in Mississippi at 9:30 in the morning. It's hot already. So I walked up there with an armful of books and asked for a vanilla ice cream cone. And the gentleman looked at me and said, "What's the matter, boy? Can't you read?" And I said, "Of course, I have all these books here." And he said, "Well, read the sign up there." So the sign said white only. And he took his thumb and pointed around to the side window. Just said, "Go around there." So when I walked around there, there was a 50-gallon metal garbage can half filled with garbage, swarming with flies and so forth. So I immediately turned and walked the 1/4 mile to school. My cousin at that time was principal of that high school, and I waited outside his office and explained to him what had happened to me. And he simply stated, well, don't worry too much about it. We simply will not frequent that establishment anymore. So that's kind of my first, indication of overt segregation, knowing about it, discussing it with family and so forth. And so that kind of that was a mark in my path to fighting for civil rights at that particular time. I left there and went on up to Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, which was approximately 60 miles from my home, and enrolled there. After my first semester there, a classmate of mine and myself attended what we call a mass meeting in Jackson, Mississippi at that time. And just coincidentally, a young man by the name of Medgar Evers was moderating that meeting. And so he was speaking of how 2 years prior, 1956, that the circuit clerks of Mississippi had arbitrarily eliminated or deleted many names from the voter roll. And he requested Tougaloo College students to help him replenish those rolls. And so he read some names, and I recognized when he got to my county, Jefferson Davis, I recognized a few names he read out there, and so I thought I had no choice but to do what I could to help get them back on the voter rolls. And so I joined up with him. It was difficult, it was dangerous, and the way it worked was Medgar would contact pastors in the 84 counties of Mississippi, and they would set up voter registration meetings. So he would contact students at Tougaloo College and give us dates and name of pastors and locations, and we would meet the pastors and go from there. The meeting was undercover, clandestine, and many times after conducting those meetings, explaining to Blacks in Mississippi voter registration process, we would take them down to the circuit clerk's office, but most time we would let them go themselves, because if we went, the circuit clerk took offense to that, and many times we would be beaten up, whatever the case might be. So they would have less trouble if they went alone. Now you have to remember that less than 95%, I should say more than 95% of the people that we took there were not allowed to vote. And we had to, I guess you might say, there was a voter registration application that you had to complete. And that application indicated that you had to interpret one of Mississippi Constitution's segment, and you could never interpret it to the likes of the circuit clerk. And whatever, no matter what you said, you failed. There were one or two people in the community who were allowed to vote. Many were not well educated at all. The well-educated individuals in the community most likely were not allowed to vote. And the lesser educated one, if the clerk wanted him to vote, he allowed him to vote. There were, should I continue?
Sure. I mean, this is fantastic. I do have some questions I want to ask you, but I don't want to interrupt your narrative, so please continue.
Yes. there are many people, including civil rights individuals, who felt that Blacks did not do enough to propel their cause during that particular time, 60s civil rights era. However, we feel, and as well, I particularly feel that we started to progress in the arena of civil rights with the return of our World War I and World War II veterans. Um, in World War, we had two World War II veterans in our community, um, Avery Tony and Curtis Hookel. And in fact, Curtis lived only about 1,000 yards from my house. These gentlemen participated in the Battle of the Bulge. And that was a combination of really battles. And Curtis Hooker participated in 4 major battles there, and Avery Tony 6 major battles during the Battle of the Bulge. And what's interesting about that is they survived. And they came back to Mississippi, to our community, our counties, and were not allowed to vote, and were ridiculed, for their efforts or their attempts to vote. And but those two gentlemen took their courage that they had during World War II, brought it back to us, the young people in our community, and demanded from us that we use that courage to try to take our people, Black people in our community, a step forward in the society of a better tomorrow. And we did, and we did what we could. And that's all of that led me to civil rights. And I, 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 I don't think, well, in fact, I know I didn't tell my parents when I first joined up with them. But when I did discuss it with them, um, uh, they felt my mom, she was a mother, and mothers were fearful for their kids to get involved. And also simply because people who were doing what I was doing and my classmates were doing were getting beaten up, and some were killed doing that. And we had a few of our, just to mention a couple of our martyrs at that time, Reverend George Lee, Lamar Smith, and Medgar Evers, of course. But Reverend George Lee was from Belzona, Mississippi. He was killed May 4, 1955, a few days prior to the murder of Emmett Till in Mississippi at that time. But he was a minister, and he had a printing press. He was a pastor of a church, and he used that printing press in his pulpit to promote voter registration. And the fathers of Belzoni met with him once and demanded that he removed his name from the voters' rolls, and he refused. And so he was murdered. Gentleman Lamar Smith, just 30 miles from my hometown, was killed in the town of Brookhaven, Mississippi. I think it was approximately 2 p.m. in the afternoon in broad daylight on the courthouse lawn, holding a fistful of absentee ballots. 3 gentlemen who were accused of that particular murder, one leaving that scene covered in blood, were never convicted. Okay, they were charged, but they were never convicted. And there were at least 12 witnesses to that particular murder, and it has never been really no conviction as of today. So it was a terrible time living in Mississippi at that particular time. But we felt that we had to do something. It was time for, we had waited too long. We had waited too long, really. And our foreparents and so forth, they had to wear that mask in public and pretend they were something that they were not. And the embarrassment of that led also to our participation, the younger generation participation, seeing our parents walk down the street having to get off the sidewalk when Caucasian passed, and were subject to ridicule at the same time. That was very motivating to us. So that's up to that point. Now,
Let me jump in with a question,
yeah.
and that relates to what you've been talking about.
Oh, sure.
I have read you use the word terror to describe growing up in Mississippi, which is a very profound word. You were the same age as Emmett Till, and so
Same age.
From an early age, that stepping out of line, as it were, could easily result in torture and death.
Yes.
For the young people who watch this recording, who have no first experience from the 60s, can you give us a sense of the fear, the mindset that you had to just live with and internalize every day in order to make it through that dark time in Mississippi?
Oh, yeah, it was, as we said before, it was a difficult time during that particular period, and it was something that we had to, just something we had to deal with. And as I look back at it now, and also then, it reminded me of the 1705 laws that were put in place to control slaves at that particular time, and those laws regulated every aspect of slave life, and those laws stayed in place. The remnants of those laws remained in place all the way up until the passing of the Civil Rights Act. Okay, so get off the sidewalk when you approach white. If you wanted to purchase shoes in the local store, draw your footprint on a sheet of paper and give that to the clerk. You couldn't, blacks could not participate in court proceedings unless it was sanctioned, by whites at that particular time. You could not vote at that time. And there was a lot of things. Interracial marriages were banned at that time. So we had to live with constant fear. Okay, that's the best way of putting it. And because someone else, even though they were not with you, it was their ideas and their philosophies that controlled your life. You did not control your life. And so that's one of the things that we had to deal with. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask about Medgar Evers. You got to know him, I assume. He was a...
Oh, yeah. I worked with him for more than 2 years. Yeah.
He was killed in June of '63, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to the impact that his death had on you?
I can speak more to the impact of his life. Medgar Evers was the bravest guy, man, that I had ever known, even to this day. In fact, I used to tell my dad that I thought Medgar was braver than him. But my dad would kind of look at me and smile and say, yeah, but he doesn't have to live with you. I do. So, but Medgar Evers, he was field secretary for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, civil rights organization known as NAACP. And he solicited members for that organization throughout the state. In fact, but he did it undercover. And everyone thought that he was an insurance salesman. Okay. Selling insurance when he met with blacks in various areas and so forth, and on plantations when he talked to them about the NAACP activities. but he was really trying to get members, for the NAACP. And Medgar, he was a man of his word. We felt that he knew everybody in Mississippi, every pastor in Mississippi, every preacher in Mississippi. Medgar knew most of them, and he, at that time, a little less so than now, churches were leaders of the movement during that particular time. Not so much today, but Medgar, he was killed because he wanted you and I to have the freedom and the right to work, the right to vote. And today in Jackson, Mississippi, his home, there's a federal post office building that bears his name, and so does a 689-foot Navy vessel bear his name today because of the work that he did in the civil rights movement. Yeah.
Did you have any optimism as you got involved to affect change? Did you have any optimism that you could change the hearts and minds of Southern segregationists?
Man, are you kidding? We thought we could change the world. We thought we could change the world, as individuals. But it was difficult. But when you walked up to that roadblock and found out that you really couldn't alone. Yes, we were very optimistic. We spoke of internally, we spoke of times to come that Blacks would be presidents of this country. And so we were looking forward, to what we call freedom at that particular time. And
Tougaloo, I know, was really, the center point for civil rights in Mississippi. I wonder if you might, since you were there, could you speak a little bit to the impact that the civil rights movement had on the student body at that time?
Well, Tougaloo was an oasis. We like to say it was an oasis in the middle of a sea of hate. Tougaloo College was the only place that interracial groups could go and meet and converse, so forth. Any other place it would be considered as breaking the laws of the state of Mississippi, because integration, you see, was banned in Mississippi. It was no longer tolerated and unlawful. So Tougaloo College, you felt free when you were there. And just ironically speaking, when you were away from Tougaloo College, let's say you were a student there and you were away, maybe home on the weekend, and when you came back and your bus came back and the bus stop was 1/4 mile from campus gate, and the bus driver would let you out, that 1/4 mile you would run to get in the gates of the campus, okay? Because you were vulnerable on that stretch of the roadway. And so once you got on the campus, once you got through that gate, you let out a deep sigh, a deep breath of complete satisfaction at that time. Crosses were burned on campus. Red Cross burned on campus, but that was due to student participation in religious protests at the time. We Tougaloo College students, along with other students, of course, opened up the various religious organizations to the worship by Blacks. On Friday nights, we would meet at the chaplain's home on campus, and we discuss what protests we were going to participate in Saturday morning, Sunday in Jackson. Many of those protests were religious, we call religious protests. because on Sunday morning we get up and put our suit and tie on and go downtown Jackson, Mississippi, and try to worship at a local white church. And many times we were arrested right there on the steps, and we're not allowed to worship at all. However, it was the Episcopalian organization that was first to open its doors to Blacks, then followed by the Methodists. And the Methodists was very interesting in the sense that in the South, the Methodist churches were segregated. In the North, they were integrated, okay? Now, so we reached out to Methodist organization and ministers of the North to come help us open up the Methodist Southern organization and churches. They did. They came to help us. And every Sunday we had a group of Methodist ministers from various places in the USA, and come down to Tougaloo and go with us on Sunday morning to the local Methodist church. And they would get arrested just along with us trying to worship at their own church. So that was kind of ironic. But we did eventually open up those churches. I think it took the Baptist organization 20 years to finally admit Blacks to worship. Yeah.
During this time, of course, John F. Kennedy from Massachusetts is running for president, wins in November of '60. What did you think of Kennedy? Did you have any hope that he would embrace the movement?
Oh, we had great hope. Oh, yes, we had great hope. We did. I won't say it was in vain. I won't go that far. But we had great hope. We felt that change was coming now. We have someone in the White House who's on our side, and so forth. But we ended up being an embarrassment to Kennedy, I believe, because of our protests and demonstrations and so forth, especially during the time when he was trying to deal with, Khrushchev and 62 when the Bay of Pigs and all of that. And we were out there marching and protesting all the time for freedom, and that was an embarrassment to him because, he was trying to fight for human rights in various countries, Here, his own country, people are protesting, for freedom and so forth. So it was a big embarrassment to him. But we had great hope on him. And of course, afterwards, in 63, 63, Bobby Kennedy kind of guided his program, along. King was killed, 63. What was that? 4 months later, Bobby, I think, was assassinated.
In 68.
68, I'm sorry. Yeah, 68. I'm sorry, yes. 68, 4 months later, Bobby. But as far as that administration gave us great hope, for the future. Yes.
I do have to ask, as an early freedom rider, Kennedy did say that the freedom riders were unpatriotic because they weren't, they were taking it easy and cooling off. That must have hurt you or been offensive to you at the time, right?
Well, to take it a little farther, when the Freedom Riders left Washington, D.C., I believe it was April 61, 2 days prior to, let me walk it all the way. They left on two buses. One took the route, both actually was coming through Anniston, Alabama, but one was like 3 or 4 hours behind the other one, you know, something like that, a few time-wise. And the Freedom Riders barely got out alive, actually. Okay. Then the other bus took the route of Birmingham, Alabama. And once it reached Birmingham, they were pulled off and beaten there also. But there were students in Nashville, Tennessee, who decided that the Freedom Rides should not end. And so some of them from the universities in Nashville, there were 5 there, and they went to Anderson, some went to Birmingham, boarded buses and came into Jackson, Mississippi, where I was at Tougaloo College, which is 10 miles away. Now, we were watching all of that on our TVs and so forth. Okay, 2 days prior to that, the governor of the state of Mississippi came on TV and stated that all of the blacks in the state of Mississippi were satisfied with their life in Mississippi. Okay, so there we were at Tougaloo College listening to him, you know, with all these statements, and he would say something like, had it not been for all of those outside agitators coming into the state of Mississippi, exciting our blacks here, everything would be great. You know, we said, this guy's crazy, you know. So there were a group of us known as the Tougaloo Four, a classmate of mine and 2 previously, one alumni of Tougaloo College and her brother. We had a meeting with some more students of Tougaloo that night, and we decided that we had to try to help the Freedom Riders in some way. You see, once they came into the city of Jackson, police marched them out of their buses, right through the white waiting room in Jackson, Greyhound bus terminal, and out the back door into the paddy wagon and on to jail. Now, we felt that they would be killed too. Now, there was the chairman of the president, get the title, of the local white citizen council made a statement that they would all be killed once they arrived in Jackson. And there were local government officials contacting the Justice Department stating also that they would be killed when they come into Jackson. And so we knew the reputation of our prison system. And we knew that once you get in there, you were not going to come out the same way that you went in, physically or emotionally, mentally, whatever, anyway. And so we felt that we had to do something to try to help those guys when they came in and were arrested. And so the only thing we could come up with, we must have been there from 6 p.m. in the afternoon to 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to determine ways, how can we help them while they are incarcerated? And the only thing that we could come up with was that we had to get into jail with them. And we felt that we had to get into jail with them simply because we felt that the state of Mississippi would not kill all of us, you know, residents as well as non-residents, which they call outside agitators. We were residents of the state of Mississippi. So we thought maybe that would stop, you know, some of the violence there. And so we went down to the Trailways bus station in Jackson at that time and was arrested. Yeah.
Please continue the story.
Oh, yeah, we walked in.
Experiences.
In fact, we were transported from Tougaloo campus to within a half block of the bus terminal by who we call the mother of the Jackson Freedom Riders, Jackson Civil Rights Movement, Mrs. A.M.E. Logan at that time, named for the Baptist Church, and I mean Methodist Church at that time. But Mrs. Logan dropped us off a quarter mile from the station. There was nobody there, and we retrieved our luggage luggage from a car and made it all the way inside the white waiting room of the bus station, where we took our seats, and we already had tickets to New Orleans, Louisiana. And so we sat down, and we had about 10 minutes to wait for the bus. And within about 5 minutes, the chief of police came into the station. Now, inside of the station itself, there were approximately 20 policemen there, and there were passengers milling around. But everybody's smiling because they were privy to information that we didn't have, and that was that we were going to be arrested in a few minutes. But the police, chief of police came in and asked us to leave because we were disturbing the peace, as he called it. And we say, we felt that was impossible because we hadn't spoken to anybody. We had just marched in and kind of took our seats there, And he said, well, that don't matter, you're still breaching the peace. We want to know how so. And we showed him our tickets. We have tickets here too. He said, that don't matter either. You're under arrest. He wouldn't even allow us to get on the bus. And so we were arrested, taken to Jackson City Jail, interrogated for a couple of days, and then transferred to county jail, Himes County Jail, and so forth. I was there for a while. Now, our intentions were to stay for 39 days, and that was the maximum number of days you could stay without being bailed out. And you had to post bond within that 39 days. Otherwise, they would transport you to Mississippi State Prison. They didn't follow that rule all the time. Now, sometimes they transported people right straight to the federal prison. The state penitentiary, known as Parchment at that time. And but anyway, after being at Himes County Jail for a couple of days, one of the jailers came there over in the cell door where I was and told me to get out. Well, I was skeptical, really, about getting out. I thought it might have been a setup, some kind of setup or something. But anyway, I did get out, and they marched me on out to the front desk, I think it was. And anyway, released. I was released. And come to find out later that the president of Tougaloo College paid a bond for me to be released. And we really didn't know why we were being released. A young lady by the name of Mary Harrison Lee now. Mary Harrison was a classmate and a fellow arrestee, a member of the Tougaloo Four. And she was released also. But we had no idea why. But the reason that we were released was they wanted my case, the NAACP wanted my case to be a part of a class action suit. It was a case, Broadwater versus the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And that case was filed with the intention of removing all of the black and white signs throughout the South, and especially in Jackson, Mississippi, and of course, the state of Mississippi itself. And so we took that case all the way to the Supreme Court. However, we also gave that case to Bobby Kennedy and the Interstate Commerce Commission. And it was the Interstate Commerce Commission that ruled that all of those black and white signs, as well as segregation itself, was unconstitutional in facilities controlled by the Interstate Commerce Commission. Okay. And that's how those signs were removed in the state of Mississippi. And I was kind of proud to be a part of that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You were affiliated, as I understand it, with the NAACP, but you also worked with CORE and with SNCC. Young people often ask us about the differences between those different organizations. Can you just kind of briefly go into the different approaches that these civil rights organizations took to accomplish ultimately the same goal?
Most of the students at Tougaloo College, we were members of anything we could join to help promote civil rights at that particular time. NAACP felt that we should take our fights. Our fights should be in the court within the judicial system. Not on the streets so much. However, they did pay my bill, and I had to thank them, so forth. But SNCC went more of a direct approach, in your face approach, protests, demonstrations, sit-ins, whatever we could do, to make our efforts known. And CORE was in the middle. CORE was kind of in the middle of all that. The Freedom Rides themselves were sponsored by CORE. Okay, and we eventually they joined up together as the Council of Federated Organization, COFO. Okay, that was a conglomeration of those three plus the Southern Christian Leadership Conference organization. They all came together and formed what was known as COFO. And COFO was to, I guess you would say, synchronize their efforts in the fight, so we wouldn't be duplicating things and so forth. And so it worked out well. Yes, we were members of all of those. Yes.
You mentioned, I believe, that you were part of some sit-ins. Can you talk about any of those in particular?
Sit-ins?
Yes, sir.
It was just a common thing to us, really. But during those times, they were also dangerous. When you were downtown and you're marching on a sit-in and people would pass by, cars throw bottles at you, throw things at you, of course, call you names and all of that. But in the sit-ins themselves was mostly toward establishment stores in the city due to their hiring practices. The stores in Jackson did not want to hire blacks. It's very seldom would you see black clerks in those stores. So we did our homework and if we find a change, Kresge's was one at that time. Woodworth, I think, was another one. Didn't want to hire blacks, and so we picketed those. We sat in at their counters, and we did all we could to get them to hire blacks as clerks in those stores. So we had boycotts, and we did that. We were successful with boycotts, and we boycotted some of those establishments. And so we did what we could do. Yeah.
The kind of abuse that we see depicted, especially with like the luncheon counter sit-ins, did you have any training or preparation for the kind of abuse you might endure in those kinds of situations?
I think you're speaking more in line with nonviolence, training within nonviolence. That was more of a kind of like an unwritten rule. You had to be nonviolent to participate. Now, people of the South, especially Mississippi, took more or less a different approach than students from various other areas of the country coming in to help us. To those students, nonviolence was a tactic that they used, okay, to promote their efforts. To us at Tougaloo College, especially, nonviolence was a way of life for us. Um, it was a way of life simply because uh, if we were nonviolent in our day, if we were other than nonviolent in our daily lives, more than likely we'd be dead. That's the bottom line, okay? Because once you attempted to be violent in any way against the system, uh, you didn't last too long. Yeah, yeah.
What do you remember from the day President Kennedy was assassinated?
You know, not very much. And I'll say why. It it became suppressed. Upon my leaving the civil rights movement, I well, there's a story behind that, but I more or less had to leave. And after I did leave, I don't know exactly what happened psychologically, mentally, or what you might call it, but I didn't want to be bothered with anybody. I didn't want to see anybody. I didn't want to participate in the movements. I didn't want to be in any large crowd setting. It was a mental thing, and I just secluded myself away. I became an alcoholic after that for a while, and finally decided that that wasn't the right way to go. But and to me, that time, I remember the incident happening. I remember how sad and we were. I remember with tears in our eyes because one of our main supporters had been assassinated. I remember all of that. Culture-wise, within that year is almost a blank to me.
Looking back on it now, of course, President Johnson very craftily used Kennedy's memory to push that civil rights legislation.
Absolutely.
I mean, how do you feel in retrospect about Lyndon Johnson and his commitment to civil rights?
He was a bully. He had to be a bully though in that situation. I understand that to ram that through. That was his goal, to get that bill passed. Once he committed himself, and so he was a Southerner. I think prior to that, some of us would have called him a racist. But I have to give the man credit. He took the bill. He decided that he was going to follow up and pass that bill that was implemented by John F. Kennedy. He was going to do his level best to get it passed, and he did. And we don't get me wrong. Now we didn't agree with all his policies. Vietnam. We think he should have got out when he was became president. But we take the good with the bad. There's something like some people and who have done great things, and later in life may have put themselves in position doing bad things. So what do you do? So we're appreciative of Lyndon B. Johnson.
You didn't talk about your activism for almost 40 years.
Yes.
but you have now started talking and speaking to groups, and you've written a book. Tell me about that shift in your perspective on this.
You're right. I did not talk about it. However, that was, I didn't talk about it simply because I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to deal with the fact of being out there on picket lines and so forth, and seeing my fellow classmates and friends being pushed around, beaten, and so forth. I didn't want to deal with the fact that it was law enforcement officials that turned my fellow Corps members, Michael Cheney, Andrew Goodman, and James Cheney and Andrew Goodman and Michael Sherman, those guys, turning them over to the Klan to be murdered. I didn't want to deal with all that stuff. And I just blocked it out. I just blocked it out. And but my granddaughter, she was in middle school, and they showed a movie, a documentary of the civil rights movement, Eyes on the Prize, which is a tremendous documentary about the movement. And she came home one weekend when she came to my house, and she was, I don't know, what, 8 or 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. Came to me and he called me Papa. I said, Papa, I saw you in the movie. And I said, what movie? She said, Eyes on the Prize. We watched it at school and I saw you. And I had to bust her bubble a little bit and let her know that wasn't me that she saw. That was someone else. And then she asked me, say, did you do anything in the civil rights movement? I said, well, I did a little, you know. She said, well, what did you do? And, I tried to evade that as much as possible. In fact, I did evaded her on that particular, but her mother heard it, my daughter, and she said, yeah, I want to know too. What did you do in the civil rights movement? You know, did you march? What did you do? And my wife heard it too. I hadn't told her, okay? And now I got 3 women, okay, on me about what did I do within the civil rights movement. So I told them a few things that I participated in with others. And they say, well, you have to put it in writing because we want to know what you did. And we'd like to see you put it in writing. And that was a stimulus for me to do, to let them know about what I had done. But by the same token, I was also involved in doing my family history. So I had a great deal of information on my particular family history, and that was a boost for me to get started on the book itself. And so I did that along with the co-author, Miss Natalie Bell, Miss Bell, who might be a cousin of mine, not sure. Her mother was Armstrong from Mississippi, 10 miles away. We felt during those years unrelated families, come to find out we may be related. But anyway, I got her to she got my book in front of publishers in New York. Okay. And they began looking at it. And I conversed a little bit back and forth. Then all of a sudden, a publisher, Health Communication out of Florida, called me one night about 8:30 at night and said, we'd like to publish your book. And that's how it got published. Really, that's how it got published. Yes.
And that was 10 years ago. And I know that you've talked to many, many people since then, sharing presentations about the book. Can you give me a sense how young people respond to your involvement in the movement?
Oh, I think they feel that I did something good. Okay. I'm serious about that. I really think they feel that They did something good. I work with young people. Not only do I do presentation, uh, in high school, in social studies classes, departments, history departments, and so forth, they have participated in some kind of civil rights activity within their curriculum. And I get 3 or 4 calls a month to help high school and middle school students with their civil rights projects. In fact, I just finished with 3 young ladies, sophomores in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 2 nights ago with their project. So they looked me up from. We have a civil rights veteran site on the web, and they looked me up on there, and they decided to ask me to help them. I am a student advocate, and I try to be an advocate for students, all of DuPage County where I live, students, high school students. I participated in presentation at those high schools. I do presentation all over the country, actually. I was doing travel prior to COVID-19. As of March, beginning of the pandemic, I've always participated in the Zoom session, doing those. So I do presentation at the library, high school, middle school, college, universities, all over the country, wherever I'm requested.
That's wonderful. I mean, it's gratifying that someone who had those kinds of experiences is willing to share them all these years later for young people who face their own set of problems in an increasingly divisive world that we live in. Primarily, what lessons from the 60s, speaking to young people today, what lessons specifically from the 60s do you think we can apply to our lives today to get through what we're going through?
That we were not unlike them, okay? We were young people just like they are today. We realize that they are seeking guidance, but we simply tell them, it's not difficult for you to answer your question as to where you should go. Now, you can go where the problems are. Look around your community, look around your school, your churches, whatever the case might be. And if you see something that is not as it should be, then that is where you should go. That is where you should be working, you know? There's power in numbers. Join up with some civic-minded organization. Everyone should be a part of some type of civic engagement project somewhere in their community. Join up with them. If you can't find one in your area, create your own. Create your own. There are many people, if there's no organization there, who have similar ideas that you do. So create your own organization. If there is insufficient housing in your neighborhood, in your community, that's where you should work. Create housing for everybody. Try to get better housing for everybody. Also in school, in your school. If, we have a problem in school, if our students do a bang up good job in their academic efforts and get that little simulated gold medal and a red, white, and blue ribbon, and you got another group over here that makes 100 basket free throws and get a 4-year scholarship, something wrong with that picture. We need to revisit. That's something you can work on. So we know that we change the world. Young people, just like them, change the world. Okay? not only this country, we changed the world in the 60s, civil rights movement, they can do the same thing today.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Is there anything that I haven't asked you? Any other particular stories or memories that you would like to share with me?
Too many. Too many.
Fortunately, they're all written down in your book.
Yes. Tougaloo College was founded in 1869. Now, ever since its founding, the teachers of that institution were about 50% Black and 50% white. So since 1869, there has been a small, very small contingent of white students at Tougaloo College. Okay, it may have been 2, it may have been 10, maybe 15. They were offspring of those teachers. Okay. Now, so there were always white students there, and one of the students was my classmate when I was going. His name was Eli Hartstetler. Eli Hartstetler was from Goshen, Indiana. And Eli came in, he was a Quaker. He represented his organization as a student there at Tougaloo College, helping us in voter registration and so forth. Eli, as I said, he was a schoolmate, he was a roommate of mine, and we didn't always participate in the same project at the same time. But Eli was beaten up several times in the jail with itself by inmates, simply because he was helping us try to register Blacks in the state of Mississippi. We thought that was terrible for us. The other thing is in higher education, we tried to open up higher education for Blacks in the state of Mississippi. Now, Medgar Evers, 1954, attempted to enter Ole Miss University of Mississippi. He was denied simply because of the color of his skin. There was Clyde Kennard. Clyde Kennard was from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He tried to enter the University of Southern Mississippi, their name now, another name back then, Mississippi Southern College back then. And he was denied simply because of the color of his skin and thrown into Parchman, Mississippi State Prison for his efforts. Okay. And there was also a young man by the name of Clennon King. Clennon King was a professor at Alcorn, a Black institution in Mississippi. And it was in 1958 that he attempted also to enter Ole Miss. He was denied simply because of the color of his skin, and he was thrown into a mental institution for his efforts. The few years later, 2 or 3 years later, in 1961, I attempted to enter all-white Millsaps College in Jackson. And I was denied simply because the color of my skin. They simply lied and said they didn't have 10 individuals who wanted to take the class that I went. But there was 10 people, more than 10 people sitting in the lobby at that moment when they made that statement, who was attempting to enroll also. They denied us simply because of the color of our skin. Of course, there was James Meredith. In 1961, he was denied. Okay, and it wasn't until the following year he was allowed in with the help of 350 federal marshals. And that night, there was a riot. 2 people died when he tried to enter. Okay, and so some interesting thing went on there. And music, people don't all the time associate the music, but music gives you courage. Music gives you courage. If you ever have heard of a young man by the name of Bob Dylan, Okay, folk singer, and Bob Dylan. He would come to Tougaloo and visit quite often when he was 17 and 18 years old. And Bob would come down and give guitar lesson to blacks in various Mississippi communities. A lot of people don't know that about Bob Dylan. And I don't even know if Bob would want you to know it. I don't know. Bob was a unique character. He didn't want to be known as a folk singer. He said, I just write it and sing it. You know, I'm nothing. I just write it and sing it. But anyway, he was a tremendous help to us. And not only him, a lot of international entertainers, okay, came to the South to participate in the civil rights movement with us. And we are so appreciative, of them for that. Yeah. That just feels like, yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm just curious, after all these years, have you ever encountered a white person who was a racist in the 60s who has apologized to you or expressed a change of heart?
No, that's only for John Lewis. They did that for John. No, I haven't. I really, to be honest with you, I have not. No.
Okay. I was just curious. I ask that question sometimes among the activists that I have the honor of speaking to.
A lot of times I once lived in an area cul-de-sac like thing with 8 or 10 houses, and it was divided between Democrats and Republican philosophy residents, and it's amazing. You may have been there 5 or 6 years, and your idea of the political standing of these individuals, you're finding you're completely off balance. I mean, off base. The ones you thought were Democrats are Republicans. The ones you thought were Republicans are Democrats. So I kind of stay away from trying to figure out who people, what their idea are concerning politics. In fact, I don't like to be. I'll be honest with you. I don't like to be completely associated in a political manner, Democrat, Republican, or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter. I want to look at the issues. I want to know what the issues are, and I want to support the issues. And I don't care if the issue that I decide to support, I don't care if it's a Republican issue or a Democratic issue. If I think it's necessary for the common good and I want to support it, I do it. Yeah.
Well, this has been fantastic. I am very, very grateful to you for taking part in this project and sharing these stories with me.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.